Have you ever felt invisible? As if your pain was so deep that the world simply stepped around you, too uncomfortable to acknowledge your existence? A millionaire sat on the same park bench every morning for 18 months after losing his wife, frozen in grief, until a young nurse did the one thing no one else had done. She saw him. What she couldn't know was that her simple act of kindness, a cup of coffee and umbrella in the rain, would not only bring him back to life, but would change the fate of an entire community. Sometimes the people who seem most broken are the ones who can teach us the most about healing, if only we have the courage to sit beside them. This is where our story begins, in Charleston's historic district, as the first light of dawn reveals the bench that would become the unlikely starting point for an extraordinary journey of healing. Dawn painted Charleston's historic district in soft light, casting long shadows through Freeman Square Park. In these quiet moments, the city seemed frozen in time, colonial architecture standing proudly while modern life still slumbered. Amongst the park's features, mature oaks, a modest fountain, winding paths, sat a single wooden bench overlooking a pond. Weathered yet sturdy, it faced east to capture the sunrise. Most mornings, this bench remained empty until the city awakened. But not today, not for the past 18 months. As lavender sky turned golden, the bench waited patiently, a silent witness to countless human stories, first kisses, final goodbyes, celebrations and sorrows. Soon its most faithful visitor would arrive, a man whose life had been interrupted by tragedy, now suspended in grief's stillness. Lucas Sterling arrived precisely at 6:45 a.m., as he did every morning regardless of weather or season. He walked with measured steps, his expensive shoes barely making a sound on the gravel path. At 42, he carried himself with the rigid posture of someone much older, as if bearing an invisible weight. His steel-grey eyes, once described by Fortune magazine as piercing with innovation, now appeared hollow, windows to rooms long abandoned. 3 years ago, Lucas had been celebrated as technology's golden child. The white Elon Musk of the new generation, tech blogs had declared. His artificial intelligence company, Nextlant, had revolutionized predictive healthcare algorithms, saving countless lives and earning him both fortune and fame. Business networks featured him regularly. His keynotes at conferences drew thousands. His success was not just professional, but personal. He had found his perfect match in Elena Vasquez, a fearless Cuban-American journalist whose investigative reporting had exposed corruption across multiple industries. They complemented each other perfectly, a former colleague would later tell a documentary crew. He built systems to protect people's futures. She exposed truths to protect their present. In those glorious days, Lucas and Elena had purchased a sprawling penthouse overlooking Charleston Harbor. They hosted gatherings for intellectuals, activists, and innovators. Their life seemed charmed, their future limitless, until that February morning when Elena traveled to Texas to cover rising tensions at the border. Lucas had been in the middle of a board meeting when his phone buzzed with a news alert. He'd excused himself, stepped into the hallway, and watched, in real time as his world collapsed. The screen of his phone had seemed both too small and frighteningly immense, as it delivered the unthinkable directly into his hands. What he witnessed in those terrible moments would forever divide his life into before and after, a division that would echo through the lives of countless others affected by the same senseless violence. The shooting happened during a live broadcast. Eleanor had been interviewing families affected by immigration policies when gunfire erupted. The camera caught her startled expression before cutting to static. By the time Lucas's private jet touched down in El Paso, she was gone, another victim of America's gun violence epidemic, another headline soon to be forgotten by most, but not by Lucas. Within weeks, he had sold his controlling interest in Nextlant. He liquidated most assets, donated substantially to gun control organizations, and vanished from public life. The tech world buzzed with rumors, mental breakdown, secret government work, relocation to some remote island. The truth was both simpler and more profound. Lucas Sterling had died alongside Elena that day, Only his body remained, going. Through mechanical motions of survival, he moved to a modest apartment in Charleston's historic district, far from their penthouse filled with memories. He established a foundation in Elena's name, but delegated all operations. His daily routine became a study in minimalism: wake, dress, walk to the park, sit, return home, eat, sleep, repeat. His phone remained perpetually off. His email auto-replied with a foundation contact. His doorbell never rang. The park bench became his sanctuary, or perhaps his purgatory. It was the only place Elena had specifically mentioned wanting to grow old together. "When we're older," she had said during a rare leisurely Sunday last fall, "I want to retire here with you, right on this bench. We'll feed ducks and judge people's outfits, and you'll finally read all those Russian novels you pretend to have." Read, she had laughed then, the sound rippling across the pond like sunshine. Now Lucas returned each day, sitting silently as if keeping an appointment with a ghost. In the early months, colleagues had tried reaching out. His phone had chimed with concerned messages. His email inbox had filled with invitations to just grab coffee or talk whenever you're ready. But as weeks turned to months, the world adjusted to his absence, just as it had adjusted to Elena's. The messages slowed, then stopped. Lucas had become a ghost haunting his own life, present but unseen, trapped in the amber of his grief. While Lucas sat in his self-imposed isolation day after day, across town, another life was unfolding. One that would eventually intersect with his in ways neither could imagine. For in Charleston, as in all cities, countless individual stories run parallel to one another, separated only by circumstance and chance, until some unseen hand guides them to cross. Across town in a small bungalow with cheerful yellow trim, Naomi Clark moved with efficient grace around her kitchen. At 27, she possessed the calm competence of someone much older and the compassionate eyes of someone who had seen too much, too soon. Her dark curls were pulled back in a practical bun, her brown skin glowing in the morning light that streamed through curtains her mother had sewn years ago. "Mom, I've made your tea and toast," she called, her voice gentle but carrying easily, through their small home. "Your medication is next to the cup." Margaret Clark appeared in the doorway, leaning slightly on her cane. At 63, she moved more slowly these days, arthritis claiming territory in her once nimble hands. But her eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. "You're leaving early again," Margaret observed, settling at the table. "The clinic doesn't open until 8. Naomi smiled, kissing her mother's cheek. "I like walking through the park first. Helps me balance before the day starts." What remained unspoken, that Naomi needed those precious moments to fortify herself before facing another day of too many patients, too few resources, and the subtle prejudices that followed a young black woman in healthcare. The park was her emotional decompression chamber, transitioning her from daughter and caregiver to healthcare professional. The kitchen itself told their story. Photographs covering the refrigerator, old cookbooks stacked beside dog-eared medical journals, the calendar marked with Margaret's doctor appointments and Naomi's shifts. A bowl of fruit on the counter contained an orange with a post-it note that read, "Eat me first." Naomi's gentle reminder to her mother about improving her vitamin C intake. "I made extra stew last night," Naomi mentioned, packing her lunch. "It's in the blue container. Mrs. Rodriguez is coming at 10 to check on you and help with the laundry." "I don't need babysitting," Margaret protested, though the lines around her eyes suggested otherwise. Last month's fall had scared them both, though neither mentioned it directly anymore. "It's not babysitting if you're paying her," Naomi countered with the practiced patience of long-standing debates. "Besides, she needs the money and you need the company." As Naomi moved about the kitchen, her gaze drifted momentarily to the photograph hanging on the wall, an image that served as both inspiration and painful reminder of why she did what she did, a silent witness to the promise she had made as a child that continued to shape her every decision. On the wall behind them hung a framed photograph of Thomas Clark, Naomi's father, Margaret's husband, smiling broadly in his postal worker uniform. His kind eyes seemed to follow his daughter as she gathered her nursing supplies and packed a small bag with extra granola bars and packaged bandages. Naomi was 7 when her father collapsed at the bus station, his undiagnosed heart condition suddenly turning fatal. She still remembered the crowd stepping around him, someone muttering about another drunk, the precious minutes lost before someone finally called for help. By then, it was too late. That day had shaped her future as indelibly as a sculptor's chisel. She would become someone who stopped, who helped, who saw people when others looked away. Now, as a community nurse working at a mobile clinic serving Charleston's low-income neighborhoods, Naomi lived that purpose daily. She had transferred from hospital work after realizing institutional health care often failed the most vulnerable. In the mobile clinic, she could reach those who fell through system crack. "You work too hard," Margaret said, scrutinizing her daughter. "Always caring for everyone else." "Says the woman who stood up to an entire school board to protect students," Naomi countered affectionately. Margaret had been a librarian at Roosevelt High School for 30 years, retiring only when her health demanded it. Her quiet advocacy for students of color had earned her both respect and resistance, particularly when she established a controversial reading program featuring diverse authors. "That was different," Margaret insisted. "It wasn't," Naomi replied, shouldering her bag. "You taught me that kindness is a form of resistance. I'm just following your example." The memory of her father's death still visited Naomi in dreams. Not just the horror of watching him fall, but the deeper wound of watching people choose not to see him. As a child, she couldn't understand how humans could step around a fellow human in distress. As an adult, she understood all too well: fear, indifference, the bystander effect, the silent categorizing of others as "not my problem." Her father had become invisible in his moment of greatest need, and that invisibility had killed him as surely as his heart condition. Her nursing instructors had praised her technical skills, but worried about her emotional boundaries. "You'll burn out caring this much," they warned. But Naomi had learned early that caring wasn't optional, it was oxygen. Her father might have lived if just one person had cared enough to stop. How could she ever walk past someone in need knowing that? With her bag packed and her mother settled with breakfast, Naomi prepared to leave for her morning walk, the daily ritual that centered her and prepared her for the challenges ahead. This walk, like so many aspects of her life, was more than simple exercise. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a daily recommitment to seeing what others missed and acknowledging those the world had rendered invisible. This particular Thursday morning, she was halfway through the park when the spring sky darkened suddenly. Charleston weather was famously unpredictable, but the speed with which clouds gathered was remarkable even by local standards. Within moments, rain began falling. Not a gentle shower, but a driving torrent that sent parkgoers scurrying for cover. Naomi opened her umbrella, adjusting her course toward the clinic. That's when she noticed him. The benchman, still sitting perfectly still, rain soaking through his expensive coat, plastering his hair to his forehead. Unlike others, he made no move to seek shelter, as if he didn't notice or didn't care about the deluge. She hesitated, her path forward clear, but something tugging her toward the bench. An image flashed unbidden, her father on the sidewalk while people hurried past. Something inside her shifted, a decision crystallizing before she could fully articulate it to herself. Changing direction, she approached the bench. Standing before him, she extended her umbrella to cover them both. His eyes, startlingly empty, flickered up to her face, the first acknowledgement she'd ever received from him. "Here," she said, reaching into her bag and extracting a paper cup of coffee she'd brought from home and a packet of tissues. "Do you look like you could use these?" He stared at the offerings, confusion momentarily animating his vacant expression. "Some storms aren't just about the weather," she added quietly, placing both items on the bench beside him. Then, with a small nod, she continued on her way, letting the rain reclaim her as she left her umbrella propped against the bench. Lucas Sterling watched her go, the warmth of the coffee cup seeping into his cold fingers, the first warmth he had registered. In months, something long dormant stirred within him, like a creature shifting in deep hibernation, not yet awake but no longer entirely asleep. The rain fell in sheets around them both now, her hurrying forward with purpose, him remaining motionless, on the bench. Yet something invisible had changed between them. A connection formed in this brief moment when one person chose to see another. Neither could have articulated it then, but this simple encounter, coffee, tissues, and 7 words spoken with genuine compassion, had created the first thread of a bridge across 2 very different kinds of loneliness. With movements so slow they barely registered as deliberate, he raised the cup to his lips and took a small sip. The coffee had cooled somewhat in the journey and the rain, but it still carried warmth, still offered something his self-imposed exile had denied him: basic human comfort. As Naomi disappeared down the park path, neither she nor Lucas realized they had just altered the course of both their lives with this brief connection. In literature, such moments are depicted with swelling music or meaningful glances. In reality, they happen in rain-soaked parks with paper cups and small kindnesses barely noticed by anyone else. The invisible threads that sometimes, if we're very lucky, stitch our broken parts back into something resembling wholeness. As Lucas sat alone on that bench each morning, how many people had walked past without seeing him? Have you ever felt invisible like Lucas, or noticed someone whose silent pain others seemed to miss? Share your thoughts in the comments while we continue this journey from isolation to connection. The morning after their rainy encounter found Naomi walking her usual path through Freeman Square Park, her thoughts occasionally drifting to the silent man and his empty eyes. She wondered if her small gesture had meant anything at all, or if it had simply washed away with yesterday's rain. Some pain ran too deep for coffee cups and kind words to reach. She understood this from her work with the grieving elderly at the clinic. Still, she couldn't shake the image of his face when he'd looked up at her. That momentary flicker of confusion, as if kindness itself had become a foreign language he could no longer translate. As she approached the familiar bench, her steps slowed. He was there, of course, still and formal in his expensive coat, but something different caught her eye: a paper cup of tea and a folded note resting on the edge of the bench. Naomi paused, uncertain. Was this meant for her, or was it simply trash someone had left behind? With hesitant fingers, she picked up the note. The handwriting inside was precise, almost architectural in its clean lines, 7 words that somehow carried the weight of volumes. "Thank you. I forgot what kindness felt like. No signature, no elaboration. But as she glanced at the silhouette beside her, she noticed something that hadn't been there before. His eyes, now following her movements, the smallest acknowledgement that somehow, against all odds, he had seen her too. For the next week, a wordless routine developed between them. Naomi would walk through the park and Lucas would acknowledge her with the slightest nod, barely perceptible to anyone who wasn't looking for it, but to Naomi, as clear as spoken words. Sometimes there would be a cup of tea waiting for her. Other days she would leave a blueberry muffin from the bakery she passed on her way. They were building a language of their own, crafted from small gestures and careful timing. Neither pushed for more. It was as if they both recognized the fragility of this connection, an origami creation that might collapse if handled too roughly. On Friday morning, Vincent the cat surprised them both by approaching Lucas after finishing the kibble Naomi had brought. The orange tabby circled the bench cautiously before settling in a patch of sunlight nearby, cleaning his paws with deliberate indifference. Lucas stared at the animal, his expression unreadable but somehow softer than usual. It was the first time Naomi had seen him notice anything beyond the pond's still waters. "He doesn't usually trust strangers," she said, her voice gentle in the morning quiet. "You must have a good soul." Lucas didn't respond, but the corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but perhaps the ghost of one. It was enough. The following Tuesday brought unexpected rain again, but this time Lucas moved slightly to the side, a silent invitation for Naomi to sit under the umbrella she had given him days before. She hesitated only briefly before accepting, leaving, a respectful distance between them as she settled on the bench. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, watching raindrops create concentric circles on the pond's surface. My mother was a librarian, Naomi said finally, not entirely sure why she chose to share this, but somehow knowing it was time to add words to their fragile connection. At Roosevelt High School for 30 years, she fought the school board to include books by authors of color in the curriculum, lost friends over it, got threats sometimes up, but she never stopped. Lucas remained still beside her, giving no indication he was listening, yet something in his posture told her he was. There was this one time, she continued, when a group of parents tried to have her fired for recommending a Toni Morrison novel to students. At the board meeting, she just stood there, calm as anything, and said, "I'm not teaching them what to think, I'm teaching them that they can think." They kept her on, but they watched her like hawks after that. She smiled at the memory. Mom always said that kindness is a form of resistance, that seeing people, really seeing them, is revolutionary in a world determined to make some of us invisible. The rain lightened to a gentle patter as Naomi fell silent. She didn't expect a response and didn't need one. Something told her that sharing her mother's story with this silent, grieving man was important, not for him perhaps, but for her. For too long she had carried her family's stories alone, had been both their keeper and their only witness. Even this one-sided sharing felt somehow like relief, like setting down a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. As she stood to leave, Lucas spoke, his voice rough from disuse but clear. "She sounds remarkable." 3 words, less than a full sentence. But they were the first words he had spoken to her, and Naomi carried their unexpected warmth with her through the remainder of the day. 2 days later, Naomi found Lucas sitting with a cardboard tray holding 2 cups of coffee. He gestured stiffly to the empty space beside him, the invitation clear if awkwardly extended. As she settled on the bench, he handed her one of the cup. The coffee was from an expensive downtown cafe, not the kind available at corner stores. "My wife's favorite," he said, the words coming with visible effort. "Elena," she said, they imported the beans from a women's cooperative in Guatemala that she'd once featured in a story. Naomi held the cup with both hands, sensing the importance of this moment. "You're Lucas Sterling," she said quietly, the name finally clicking into place. She had seen his face in news articles following the shooting. Everyone in Charleston knew the story of the tech millionaire whose journalist wife had been killed on camera. He nodded once, tension visible in his jaw. "I'm Naomi Clark," she offered in return. "I know," he said. "I asked the barista who makes your tea at the corner shop." The admission surprised her, that he had been curious enough to learn her name, that he had spoken to someone else about her. It suggested an awakening interest in the world beyond his grief, however small. Eleanor was covering immigration policies at the border, he continued after a long pause. She specialized in humanizing complex issues, making statistics into stories with faces and names. His voice grew softer. She interviewed a mother who had just been reunited with her children after separation. That's when it happened. 3 shots. They weren't even aiming at her, just random crossfire from a demonstration turned violent. Lucas stared into his coffee. We had talked that morning. She was excited about the story, said it might actually change minds. The last thing she told me was that she'd be home in time for the dinner reservations I'd made for our anniversary. He fell silent then, the effort of sharing depleting. Whatever energy had prompted his unexpected openness. Naomi didn't press for more. There was no need for platitudes or expressions of sympathy. Both would have been insults to the magnitude of his loss. Instead, she simply sat beside him, bearing witness to his grief without trying to diminish or solve it. "Thank you for the coffee," she said finally, "and for telling me about Elena." As she rose to leave, he caught her gaze. "She would have liked you," he said. It sounded like both a blessing and a confession. The weeks that followed brought subtle but significant changes to Freeman Square Park. New signs appeared near the benches. No loitering, park closes at sunset, no food distribution without permit. City maintenance workers began arriving. Earlier, power washing the walkways with greater frequency, clearing away any evidence of the homeless who sought shelter under the park's protective canopy of oaks. As Naomi walked her usual route one morning, she noticed a group of well-dressed residents speaking with a police officer near the park entrance, gesturing toward a young man sleeping on a distant bench. Their voices carried in the morning air. "It's becoming a safety concern," a woman in an expensive suit was saying. "Property values are dropping. We pay significant taxes to maintain this neighborhood's standard." Naomi slowed her pace, a familiar tension tightening her chest. These were the invisible borders of Charleston, the lines between those who belonged and those who didn't, drawn and redrawn daily through policies disguised as progress. Vincent appeared from beneath a hedge, winding between her ankles with unusual agitation, as if sensing her disquiet. She crouched to offer his breakfast, using the moment to compose herself. The conversation with the police officer continued, phrases like undesirable elements and quality of life concerns drifting toward her. When she reached Lucas's bench, she found him watching the interaction as well, his expression unreadable, but his posture alert in a way she hadn't seen before. Without comment, she sat beside him, both of them observing as the officer approached the sleeping man, rousing him with practiced efficiency, instructing him to move along. "It's always been like this," Naomi said quietly, "just usually less visible." Lucas nodded once, his gaze following the homeless man as he gathered his meager belongings. Something shifted in his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, of another, kind of invisibility different from but no less powerful than his own. Over the following days, Lucas began to notice things he had previously overlooked during his months of self-imposed isolation. He watched as Naomi greeted the elderly man, who fed pigeons each morning, how she sometimes slipped him a package of crackers or a small toiletry kit. He observed her brief interactions with the teenage girl who slept behind the hydrangea bushes when the shelters were full, the way Naomi would leave a granola bar and a bottle of water on the bench nearby without drawing attention to the act. These small kindnesses reminded him painfully of Elena. His wife had possessed the same ability to see beyond surfaces, to recognize humanity where others saw only problems or statistics. During their early dating years, she had dragged him to community meetings and volunteer events, insisting that his technological innovations would mean nothing if disconnected from the people they were meant to serve. "Algorithms, without empathy, are just sophisticated prejudice," she had told him once. At the time, he'd found it a charming oversimplification. Now, watching Naomi navigate the increasingly hostile atmosphere of the park, he recognized the profound truth in Elena's words. One morning, Lucas arrived earlier than usual, just as park maintenance finished their daily cleaning. He noticed how they deliberately sprayed water on the benches where the homeless sometimes slept, ensuring they would remain wet and unusable for hours. The casual cruelty of this action, its calculated indifference, struck him with unexpected force. When Naomi arrived, he found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. "They're systematically making it impossible for certain people to exist in public spaces." She glanced at him, surprised both by his observation and his initiative in sharing it. "Yes," she agreed. "It's called hostile architecture. The same reason they removed the backrests from the benches near the west entrance. Elena wrote about this in Detroit," he said. "The criminalization of poverty disguised as urban renewal." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared values that went beyond their tenuous morning rituals. Naomi saw Lucas not just as a grieving widower, but as someone who understood structural injustices. Lucas saw Naomi not just as a kind nurse, but as someone continuing a fight his wife had valued. "I've been bringing extra supplies," Naomi admitted, "leaving care packages at night when no one's watching. But they're making it harder." Lucas nodded, thoughtful. For the first time in 18 months, he felt a flicker of something beyond grief, a familiar anger at systemic injustice that had once fueled his work with Eleanor. The sensation was so foreign after months of emotional numbness that he hardly recognized it. That evening, Naomi returned home exhausted from the mobile clinic. Several elderly patients had complications from rationing medications they couldn't afford, including Mrs. Dawson, whose heart condition had worsened significantly. No beds. At Memorial until next week, Dr. Josephs had said while closing up. Next week might be too late, Naomi had argued. The system doesn't care what we know, he'd replied wearily. Now at her kitchen table, Naomi felt the day's weight pressing down. Even her mother's cornbread couldn't comfort her tonight. You're quiet, Margaret observed, stirring jambalaya. Bad day. Trying to provide 21st century care with 19th century resources, Naomi replied. And how's your benchman at Lucas? Naomi smiled slightly. He's waking up. Today he actually talked about the park's anti-homeless measures. I remember when his wife was killed, Margaret said. She did important reporting on housing. Discrimination? She was doing something that mattered, Naomi sighed. Meanwhile, I'm just treating symptoms while the disease rages on. That's not fair to yourself, Naomi. Some days I feel like I'm screaming underwater, expected to be strong enough for everyone but never need care myself. Black women's burden, Margaret said softly. Does it ever get lighter? No, Margaret answered honestly. But you get stronger. And sometimes you find people willing to carry it with you. Naomi thought of Lucas. He listens, she said. He doesn't try to fix things. He just witnesses. Margaret nodded. Sometimes that's the rarest gift of all. That night, Lucas sat alone in his sparsely furnished apartment, a glass of untouched whiskey on the coffee table before him. Since Elena's death, he had developed a habit of pouring drinks he never consumed, another ritual of remembrance, without purpose or pleasure, but tonight something felt different. The conversation with Naomi about the park's hostile measures toward the homeless had stirred something long dormant within him. For the first time in months, he moved toward the closet where he had stored Elena's belongings. The boxes remained, sealed with packing tape, just as the grief counselor had advised against. You need to process her things, the well-meaning woman had insisted. It's part of accepting her death. Lucas had fired her the next day. Now, with hands that trembled slightly, he opened the box labeled work. Inside lay Elena's notebooks, press passes, and the external hard drive where she backed up her research. He lifted out a worn leather journal, the one she had carried during her last year. The pages fell open to an unfinished draft about community support systems in areas affected by economic displacement. Local solutions often emerge from necessity, Elena had written, when institutional frameworks fail to recognize human dignity as a non-negotiable starting point. Lucas traced the words with his fingertip, her voice suddenly so present he could almost hear her in the empty room. For 18 months, he had preserved her in amber, unchanging, frozen at the moment of loss. But reading her words now, he realized he had been betraying her most fundamental beliefs. Eleanor had never been static. She had been motion and purpose and growth. By locking his grief in place, he had reduced her to less than she was. He continued reading, finding notes for stories she had planned to pursue after the border assignment. Many centered around community resilience, how people supported one another when systems failed them. In the margin of one page, she had scribbled, "Follow up with Charleston Community Health Initiatives, mobile clinics reaching underserved neighborhoods." Lucas stared at the note, a strange sense of connection forming. Had Elena known about Naomi's clinic? Had she perhaps been planning to feature the very work that Naomi now carried out daily? The coincidence felt too precise to be meaningless. For the first time since her death, Lucas felt a flutter of something beyond pain, a sense that Eleanor's work remained unfinished, but not necessarily ended. Perhaps there was a way to honor her that went beyond preservation, that embraced the forward motion she had valued so deeply. He closed the journal carefully, but instead of returning it to the box, he placed it on his bedside table. A small change, but significant, the first alteration to his environment he had willingly made in 18 months. The following week brought increased tension to Freeman Square Park. A newly formed Neighborhood Safety Committee began conducting regular walks through the area, their matching navy blue windbreakers bearing a logo of a shield surrounding a tree. Their stated purpose was to ensure the park remains welcoming for all residents, but their actions told a different story. They documented anyone they deemed suspicious with cell phone photographs, called the police for minor infractions, and once, memorably, poured water over a food package that Naomi had discreetly left behind a bench. Their leader, a real estate developer named Richard Harmon, had recently purchased several properties surrounding the park and made no secret of his plans for revitalization, a word that inevitably meant displacement for those who couldn't afford rising rents. Naomi heard about the committee's activities from her patients at the clinic, elderly residents who could no longer sit on their favorite benches without being questioned, homeless individuals who had been escorted from the park for loitering, despite having nowhere else to go during daylight hours. As she walked through the park one morning, she noticed several committee members gathered near the western entrance, speaking with 2 police officers. Their conversation fell silent as she passed, but their stares followed her progress toward Lucas's bench. She had become a person of interest to them, the woman who spoke to the homeless, who left supplies, who challenged their vision of an antiseptic neighborhood, scrubbed of anything that might decrease property values. When she reached Lucas, she found him watching the group with undisguised contempt. "They've been photographing people," he told her without preamble, "including you yesterday and the day before." Naomi's throat tightened. "Does that bother you? Being seen with me?" The question hung between them, heavier than she had intended. Lucas met her gaze, something fierce flickering in his previously empty eyes. "No," he said firmly. "It bothers me that they exist." The simple statement carried unexpected weight. For the first time, Lucas had expressed a preference, a value judgment about the present, rather than merely enduring it. It was a small step, but a significant one. From passive witness to active participant in the world around him. "They're holding a community meeting next week," Naomi said, "about park safety measures, really about removing anyone who doesn't fit their vision of who belongs here." Lucas nodded once, processing this information with the analytical focus that had once made him a technology innovator. "Will you attend?" "I have to," she replied. "Someone needs to speak for those they're trying to erase." Saturday morning dawned unusually bright after a week of intermittent rain. Naomi arrived at the park earlier than usual, having promised to cover a colleague's shift at the clinic. The paths were nearly empty, dew still glistening on the grass, birds more vocal than the absent humans. Lucas was already at his bench, his posture slightly less rigid than usual. As Naomi approached, she noticed Vincent following at a distance, his orange coat vibrant against the green backdrop. The cat had been more skittish lately, perhaps unsettled by the increased human activity and confrontations in his territory. "Good morning," Naomi greeted, settling beside Lucas. She placed a paper bag between them. "Blueberry scones, still warm." Lucas nodded in thanks, his gaze fixed on Vincent, who had stopped several feet away, watching them cautiously. "He's been hiding more," Naomi observed. "I think the committee people chased him off yesterday." Lucas made a sound of disgust. "Of course they did. Can't have evidence of nature in their sanitized version of a park." The bitterness in his voice surprised her, another sign of his emerging reconnection with the world and its injustices. She opened her small bag of cat food, making the familiar clicking sound that usually brought Vincent running. Today, he approached more hesitantly, stopping just beyond arm's reach. "It's okay," she called softly. "It's just us. The mean people aren't here yet." Vincent blinked slowly, his single ear twitching as he assessed the situation. Then, to Naomi's astonishment, instead of coming to her, the cat padded directly to Lucas. Without hesitation, the animal leapt onto the bench and then, in one fluid movement, settled into Lucas's lap. Lucas froze, his hands suspended in air, his expression a mixture of shock and something more vulnerable. Vincent kneaded his paws against Lucas's expensive trousers, then curled into a comfortable ball, purring loudly enough for Naomi to hear. "He's never done that before," she whispered, afraid any sudden movement might break the spell. Slowly, with excruciating care, Lucas lowered one hand to the cat's back. His fingers trembled slightly as they made contact with the warm fur. Vincent's purr intensified, his eyes closing in contentment. "I haven't touched a living thing in 18 months, Lucas said, his voice barely audible. Not a handshake, not a hug. Nothing. The simple confession broke something open between them. In that moment, Naomi understood the true depth of his isolation, not just emotional withdrawal, but physical severance from the tactile comfort of living connection. She had seen this before in her elderly patients who had lost spouses. The skin hunger that came from prolonged absence of touch, the way they would hold her hand during blood pressure readings a few seconds longer than necessary. Lucas continued to stroke Vincent with careful precision, as if relearning a forgotten language. A single tear tracked down his cheek, though he seemed unaware of it. The cat stretched luxuriously under his attention, completely at ease. "Sometimes, Lucas," said the words emerging slowly, painfully. "I sit here hoping someone will notice I'm still breathing." The raw honesty of the statement hung in the air between them. Not a plea for pity, but a simple truth finally acknowledged, that beneath his carefully maintained facade of detachment, Lucas Sterling was suffocating in his isolation, desperate for recognition of his continued existence. Naomi felt her own eyes filling with tears. She didn't reach for him, intuiting that such a gesture would be too much too soon. Instead, she offered the only true comfort she knew how to give. "Witness. I see you," she said softly. "I've always seen you." Vincent stretched once, more before settling deeper into Lucas's lap, a small orange bridge between two wounded souls, learning hesitantly to trust again. The day of the community meeting arrived with an unusual chill for late spring. The previous evening, flyers had appeared throughout the neighborhood, announcing the Neighborhood Safety Committee's public forum on park improvement initiatives. The carefully worded bulletin promised cooperative solutions for maintaining our community standards, language that Naomi recognized as coded exclusion wrapped in civic concern. She had spent the night assembling information packets, statistics on homelessness in Charleston, testimonials from park regulars, studies showing that inclusive public spaces actually increased property values and community safety. Her mother had helped despite her arthritis. "You know they won't listen," Margaret had said, not unkindly. "I have to try," Naomi had replied. "Even if it changes nothing, there needs to be a record that someone stood against this." Now, as morning light filtered through the trees, Naomi made her usual walk through the park with heightened awareness of its vulnerability. Lucas was at his bench, a newspaper open on his lap, the first reading material she had ever seen him bring. It was open to an article about the upcoming meeting. "You're going," he said. Not a question, but an observation. "I have to," she replied. "I'm bringing documentation about who actually uses this park. Facts they'd prefer to ignore." They sat in silence, watching a pair of ducks guide their ducklings across the pond. The simple family procession seemed to emphasize everything at stake: the right of all living things to exist in shared spaces without justification. At the community center, the large meeting room had been arranged with rows of chairs facing a table where Richard Harmon and 4 committee members sat in matching navy windbreakers. Naomi took a seat near the back, laying her information packets on the empty chair beside her. She scanned the crowd for Lucas but didn't expect him to come. Public gatherings would likely be too overwhelming after months of isolation. "Richard." Harmon approached the podium with a confident smile, revealing expensive dental work. "Welcome, neighbors and friends. We're gathered to discuss the future of our beloved Freeman Square Park, a jewel in Charleston's crown that has, unfortunately, fallen victim to certain elements that diminish its beauty and safety." His carefully constructed speech continued, filled with euphemisms for homeless people and thinly veiled complaints about non-residents. He presented architectural renderings showing a redesigned park with fewer benches, more lighting, decorative fencing, and sophisticated security. When Naomi finally raised her hand, Harmon's smile tightened as he acknowledged her. "My name is Naomi Clark," she began, rising with calm dignity. "I'm a nurse with the mobile health clinic. I'd like to address some misconceptions about the park's current users." She distributed her information packets while speaking. "The data shows that Freeman Square serves a diverse cross-section of our community, including many elderly residents on fixed incomes and working families who have no other access to green space. Ms. Clark, Harmon interrupted, we appreciate Oyorka's humanitarian concerns, but this meeting is about practical improvements to a public resource. People are practical concerns, Naomi countered. The homeless individuals you're eager to remove aren't outsiders. They're former residents displaced by the very development projects your company has championed. That's enough, Harmon snapped, abandoning his veneer of civility. You're advocating for enabling behaviors that destroy neighborhoods. Your bleeding heart approach encourages dependency and degrades property values. If you're so concerned, why don't you invite these homeless individuals into your own home instead of imposing them on responsible citizens? The room grew tense. Naomi stood her ground, though she felt suddenly painfully alone. Because public spaces belong to everyone, she said quietly. Even those you find inconvenient. You're encouraging a handout culture, another committee member called out. These people need to take responsibility for themselves. They need resources and compassion, Naomi countered, her voice beginning to tremble. Many are elderly, disabled or suffering from untreated mental health conditions. They're human beings, not eyesores to be removed from your field of vision. In that moment, Naomi felt the full weight of her isolation, a single voice against a tide of entrenched power and privilege. As the confrontation escalated, no one noticed the door at the back opening quietly. Lucas Sterling stood in the entryway, momentarily frozen as he absorbed the hostile scene. 18 months of self-imposed isolation had left him unprepared for the sensory assault of a crowded room. For a moment, his instinct to retreat nearly overwhelmed him. Then he saw Naomi, standing alone, facing the committee with quiet dignity despite the tremor in her voice. Something in her solitary courage pierced through his hesitation. With deliberate steps, he moved into the room, drawing surprised glances as people recognized the reclusive millionaire. Ms. Clark, Richard Harmon was saying dismissively, your advocacy for vagrants is admirable in theory, but impractical in reality. This community has standards to maintain. Lucas approached the front, positioning himself beside Naomi. A ripple of whispers followed him. Isn't that Lucas? Sterling, the tech guy whose wife thought he'd left town. Lucas Sterling, he said, his voice rough from disuse but carrying unexpected authority. I've been a daily visitor to Freeman Square for the past 18 months. I've witnessed firsthand what Ms. Clark is describing. Richard Harmon recovered quickly, his practiced smile returning. Mr. Sterling, we're honored by your presence. Your situation is well known, and we deeply sympathize. However, this meeting concerns long-term community planning that might not be immediately apparent to someone in temporary distress. Lucas met the man's gaze directly. My judgment isn't impaired, Mr. Harmon. It's clarified. I've spent more time in that park than anyone here. I've seen who uses it, who needs it, and who belongs there. And I've seen your committee members photographing people without consent, harassing the elderly, and pouring water on food left for those in need. With all due respect, Harmon countered, your technology background hardly qualifies you to evaluate urban development strategies. These improvements benefit everyone by creating a safer, more attractive environment. My wife was Elena Vasquez, Lucas replied, sending another wave of whispers through the audience. Before her death, she documented how initiatives like yours consistently target the vulnerable while claiming universal benefit. She would have recognized this proposal for what it is, systematic exclusion cloaked in civic concern. He turned slightly toward Naomi. You asked why Ms. Clark doesn't invite homeless individuals into her home instead of imposing them on your version of community. The question reveals your fundamental misunderstanding. Public spaces exist precisely because private charity can never substitute for communal responsibility. Lucas paused, his gaze sweeping the room. If she's encouraging anything, it's dignity. The simple statement hung in the air, powerful in its directness. Naomi stood straighter beside him, their unexpected alliance creating a center of gravity that shifted the room's dynamic. I've documented 37 instances of your committee members intimidating legitimate park users over the past week, Lucas continued, producing a small notebook. I've also researched your development company's history of property acquisitions, following beautification initiatives exactly like this one. The pattern is remarkably consistent. If this proposal moves forward as designed, I'm prepared to fund legal challenges based on discriminatory impact. I'm also prepared to purchase properties surrounding the park specifically to maintain affordable housing and ensure continued diverse access. A woman toward the back stood up. I've lived across from the park for 40 years. When my husband died, sitting on those benches and talking to whoever came by kept me going. If they remove those backrests like they're planning, I won't be able to use the park anymore. Her testimony broke something open. Suddenly others were standing, offering their own experiences of the park as an essential community space. As these voices rose, Lucas stepped slightly back, allowing community members to take center stage. He moved closer to Naomi. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," Lucas replied quietly. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, and for teaching me to see others again." Something shifted between them, a recognition that went beyond their morning bench conversations. They stood together, as allies united by a shared vision of a world where visibility was not determined by privilege. What neither Lucas nor Naomi noticed during the heated community meeting was the young journalism student in the back corner, phone raised to capture the confrontation. Amber Rodriguez, working on an assignment about urban development, had come expecting routine civic discourse. Instead, she had documented something far more compelling, the reclusive tech millionaire emerging from isolation to defend the homeless, standing alongside a community nurse against powerful development interests. By evening, her edited 3-minute video had been posted to multiple platforms with the caption, "Tech millionaire Lucas Sterling breaks 18-month silence to defend park access for homeless with powerful speech about dignity." The clip captured Lucas's most impactful statement. If she's encouraging anything, it's dignity, and showed the community's shift from passive observers to active participants. The following morning, as Naomi took her usual path through Freeman Square, she noticed increased activity, more people walking the paths. A news van parked at the entrance, strangers looking expectantly toward Lucas's bench. She quickened her pace, concern growing. Lucas was already there, staring at his phone. The first time she had seen him use the device. When he looked up, his expression was a mixture of alarm and resignation. "Did you know about this?" he asked, turning the screen toward her. The video was playing, his own voice emerging as he defended her position. "No," she replied, settling beside him. "I had no idea anyone was filming." Lucas nodded, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of agitation she had never witnessed from him before. "It's everywhere, 3 million views since last night. My phone started ringing at dawn. Journalists, old colleagues, the foundation board." Naomi watched his face, recognizing the signs of someone approaching their threshold for stimulation. "How are you feeling about it?" "Exposed," he said finally, "but also relieved, somehow. Like a door I've been holding shut has been forced open." Her own phone buzzed with messages from her mother, Dr. Josephs, and several friends and colleagues, all referencing the video. "It seems we've both been thrust into the spotlight," she said, showing him her notifications. "I'm sorry," Lucas said. "This wasn't what you signed up for when you brought me coffee in the rain." The reference to their first encounter brought a smile to her face. "I don't regret it," she said simply. Vincent the cat emerged and made directly for Lucas, jumping into his lap with newly established confidence. "At least someone isn't impressed by my internet fame," Lucas observed with dry humor, stroking the cat. "What happens now?" Naomi asked. "Now I have to decide if I'm ready to exist in the world again. Not just sitting on this bench, but actually participating, having opinion, taking stands." He paused. "It's terrifying." "You've already taken the hardest step," Naomi pointed out. "Yesterday, in that room." "That was different," Lucas replied. "That was for you." The simple admission hung between them, a recognition that his re-emergence had not been about abstract principles, but about Naomi herself. about refusing to let her stand alone when she had seen him at his most invisible. Lucas's phone buzzed again. "The Foundation Board wants an emergency meeting. Apparently my public stance on homelessness has implications for our funding priorities. Will you go?" He nodded decisively. "Yes, it's time I took responsibility for Elena's legacy instead of just preserving it." As they sat together, Amber Rodriguez approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, I'm the one who posted the video. I wanted to apologize for not getting your permission, but also, thank you. People are organizing to attend the next city council meeting about the park proposals." "No apology necessary," Lucas said. "Some things should be witnessed. Would you be willing to answer a few questions about why this issue matters to you?" Lucas exchanged a glance with Naomi, seeking guidance. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Not today," he said, "but soon. I'm still adjusting to being visible again." After Amber left, Lucas turned to Naomi. "Did I handle that correctly? I've forgotten the protocol for everything." "You handled it perfectly," she assured him. "One step at a time." 3 days after the video went viral, Lucas and Naomi met at their bench in the unusual quiet of early evening. The day's stream of curious onlookers had finally dispersed, leaving the park to settle into twilight peace. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving everything with a glistening sheen that caught the last golden rays of sunlight. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind. Lucas had met with his foundation board, redirecting significant resources toward community housing initiatives. Naomi had been invited to speak at the upcoming city council meeting. Richard Harmon had proposed a community input task force, a transparent attempt to salvage his reputation, but still a victory for park inclusivity. "I spoke with Elena's parents today," Lucas said, after they had sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. "First time since the funeral. They saw the video. How was it? Difficult? Necessary?" He paused. "They said they recognized their daughter in what I did. That she would have been proud." His voice caught slightly. "I hadn't considered that, what Elena would think of who I've become since losing her." "What do you think she would think?" Naomi asked gently. "I think she would have been disappointed by my disappearance. Not because she wouldn't understand the grief, but because she believed so strongly in engagement, in bearing witness." He traced a pattern on the damp bench. Elena never looked away from difficult truths. "I dishonored that by retreating completely. Grief isn't rational," Naomi said. "It doesn't follow principles or honor values. It just is." "True," Lucas acknowledged. "But at some point, grief became a choice for me. A familiar room. I refused to leave because the alternative was too frightening. I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small journal bound in worn leather. This was Eleanor's, her last notebook. She had notes about community health initiatives, specifically mobile clinics serving neighborhoods like yours. He handed it to Naomi. "I think she would have wanted you to have it, to continue the research she never got to complete." Naomi accepted the journal with reverent hands. "Lucas, I don't know what to say. It's the right thing," he said simply. "Elena believed in documenting invisible struggles, making the unseen seen. That's what you do every day, with your patients, with the homeless in the park. With me." "I need to tell you something," Lucas said, his voice dropping to near a whisper. "Something I haven't told anyone." He stared at the pond, gathering courage. "Some days, most days during that first year, I sat here hoping someone would notice I was still breathing, not to help me or save me or fix me, just to acknowledge that I still existed when everything that made life meaningful had vanished. People stopped seeing me long before I sat on this bench," he continued. "After the initial sympathy wore off, I became uncomfortable to look at, a walking reminder of how quickly happiness can shatter. Friends stopped calling, colleagues averted their eyes." He turned to her, his eyes holding a depth of emotion that took her breath away. "Then you came along with coffee and an umbrella. You didn't try to cheer me up or tell me time would heal. You just saw me, acknowledged my existence without demanding I perform recovery to make you comfortable. Naomi thought of her father on the bus station floor, of how differently things might have ended if just one person had truly seen him. "I understand invisibility," she said softly. "I've watched it kill people." Lucas nodded, a profound understanding passing between them. "That day in the rain, when you said some storms aren't just about the weather, it was the first time in 18 months I felt human contact that wasn't wrapped in pity or discomfort." "I don't know how to do this," Lucas admitted finally. "How to be in the world again. How to balance honoring Elena's memory with building something new. No one knows how," Naomi said. "We all just improvise and hope we're getting it mostly right." Lucas smiled slightly, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Is that the official medical perspective?" "Absolutely. I'll write you a prescription. For daily improvisation, if you'd like." As the last light faded, Lucas took a deep breath. "Naomi, yes. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for reminding me that I'm still breathing." Without thinking, she reached for his hand, her fingers closing over his. It was their first deliberate physical contact, and she felt him tense momentarily before relaxing into the touch. "Even broken people can become a safe place for each other," she said softly. They sat together as evening deepened around them, two souls who had found each other across vastly different circumstances, yet recognized in each other a common language of loss and resilience. Vincent appeared from the shadows, settling between them, his warm presence a living embodiment of the connection they had built, tentative at first, then increasingly confident, but always honest in its simplicity. The morning after their twilight conversation, Naomi woke to a text message from Lucas. "Can I be part of the world again? With you?" The simple question carried layers of meaning. It wasn't just about their friendship or park advocacy. It was about Lucas deliberately choosing connection over isolation, action over retreat. Asking her permission felt significant, not because he needed it, but because he valued her enough to make her part of this pivotal decision. Naomi sat with the message for several minutes before typing, "Yes," one day at a time. Later that morning, they met at a small cafe 3 blocks from the park, their first meeting outside the confines of their bench. Lucas arrived early, securing a quiet corner table. When Naomi entered, she immediately noticed subtle changes in his appearance, his hair freshly trimmed, his clothes still formal but less rigidly coordinated. "I ordered tea," he said as she sat down. "The barista remembered how you take it. Apparently you're a regular here." "Before my shift every Tuesday and Thursday," she confirmed with a smile. The cafe hummed with morning activity. 6 months ago, this sensory assault would have overwhelmed Lucas completely. Even now, she noticed his hands occasionally tightening around his mug, his breathing deliberately measured. But he was here, choosing discomfort for connection. "I've been thinking about what happens next," he said. "With the park, with my foundation, with everything. I can't go back to who I was before Elena died, but I can't stay frozen either." "What do you want to do?" Naomi asked. "I want to do something that matters," he answered. Determination revealing glimpses of the innovative leader he had once been, something Elena would recognize. Over the next 2 weeks, Lucas began methodically rebuilding connections he had severed 18 months earlier. He started with his foundation, scheduling meetings with board members who had operated largely without his input since Elena's death. Though they had maintained her charitable initiatives, the foundation had become increasingly conservative, focusing on safe donations rather than addressing root causes. "We need to move beyond symptom management," Lucas told the startled board. "Elena believed in targeting systemic issues. We've become too cautious." The business press quickly caught wind of Lucas Sterling's re-emergence. Technology blogs speculated about his potential return to Nextland. Former colleagues reached out tentatively. A venture capital firm inquired about his interest in advising healthcare startups. Through it all, Lucas maintained his morning ritual at the park bench, though now he often arrived with a laptop working as he waited for Naomi. Their conversations shifted, becoming more forward-looking, less weighted by grief. "Nexlant wants me back," Lucas mentioned one morning, his tone neutral but his posture tense. "Not as CEO, they're happy with my replacement, but as a special advisor on their healthcare equity initiative." "How do you feel about that?" Naomi asked. "Conflicted," he admitted. "The work still matters to me. Our algorithms could help identify healthcare disparities in underserved communities, but going back feels like betraying Elena by moving forward," Naomi suggested gently. Lucas looked up, surprised. "Yes, exactly. How did you know?" "Because guilt is grief's constant companion," she said. "We feel guilty for smiling, for continuing to live when they cannot." "What would you do?" he asked finally. "I'd go where I could do the most good," Naomi answered. "That's what Elena would want. Not preservation of your pain, but transformation of it into something healing." By week's end, Lucas had accepted the advisory role at Nexlant, with specific conditions focusing on healthcare access for underserved populations. It wasn't a return to his former life, but a new path informed by everything he had experienced, including his friendship with a nurse who had seen him when he was invisible. As Lucas reconnected with his professional world, Naomi found herself navigating unexpected changes. The viral video had suddenly made her an unofficial spokesperson for community healthcare access. When the Charleston Health Initiative invited her to speak at their annual conference about the mobile clinic's approach, Dr. Josephs insisted she accept. "They need to hear from people actually doing the work," he'd urged, "not just administrators and politicians." Public speaking had never been Naomi's strength. She had always preferred one-on-one patient interactions to addressing groups. Working with the unseen and overlooked had become her comfort zone precisely because it didn't require performing or promoting herself. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted to her mother one evening. "I'm not a speaker. I'm not a policy expert. I'm just a nurse trying to help patients." "So that's exactly why you should speak," Margaret replied. "They have plenty of policy experts. What they lack is your perspective, the daily reality of healthcare inequality." "I feel like an imposter. Who am I to tell these people anything?" "You're Thomas Clark's daughter," Margaret said firmly. "A man who died because systems failed him. A man whose daughter decided that wouldn't happen to anyone else if she could help it." The invocation of her father's memory struck Naomi deeply. She had never explicitly connected her career choice to his death, but the truth of her mother's words was undeniable. At her next meeting with Lucas, she mentioned the conference invitation, voicing her insecurities. "I don't feel qualified," she concluded. "I'm just one nurse with a limited perspective." Lucas listened thoughtfully, then said, "Do you remember what you told me when I asked if you thought the park committee would listen to your concerns? That I had to try anyway. That even if it changed nothing, there needed to be a record that someone stood against it." "Exactly," Lucas nodded. "Your voice matters precisely because it's authentic. You're speaking as a witness to specific truths others need to hear." "When's the conference?" Lucas asked. "Next Thursday," Naomi replied. "I'll be there," he said simply. "In the back, and you won't even notice me, but I'll be there." The offer, unassuming yet profound in its solidarity, eased something tight in Naomi's chest. She had spent so long being the supporter, the caregiver, that having someone deliberately choose to witness her felt like an unfamiliar but precious gift. The morning of the Charleston Health Initiative conference dawned clear and bright. Naomi had barely slept, her prepared remarks revised countless times until the pages were creased from handling. "You look beautiful," Margaret said. "And, more importantly, you look ready." "I don't feel ready," Naomi admitted. "No one ever does before saying something important." The hotel conference room was already half full when Naomi arrived. She scanned the crowd nervously, looking for Lucas but not finding him. Had he changed his mind? As she approached the speaker's preparation area, Dr. Josephs intercepted her. "Perfect timing. You're after the opening remarks and the policy panel. About 45 minutes from now." A message notification lit up her phone, that from Lucas. I'm here, last row, left side. Remember, you're not speaking as an expert, but as a witness. Your truth matters. Relief washed through her as she glanced toward the back of the room. There he was, Lucas Sterling, sitting quietly in a crowded conference simply to support. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave a slight nod of encouragement. When her turn at the podium came, Naomi's initial nervousness translated into passionate clarity. She spoke not from her prepared notes, but from lived experience, from watching her father die unnoticed, from treating elderly patients whose greatest ailment was invisibility, from witnessing how systems consistently failed those already marginalized. Healthcare isn't just about medicine, she concluded. It's about seeing people completely, their circumstances, their barriers, their humanity. When we design systems that ignore these realities, we're not practicing healthcare, we're performing it, with predictably inequitable results. Applause that followed startled her with its enthusiasm. As audience members approached with questions, Naomi felt a shift within herself, a growing confidence in the value of her perspective. Later, after the proceedings ended, Naomi and Lucas walked along the harbor promenade. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the water. "You were remarkable," Lucas said, his usual reserve softened by admiration. "Everyone was talking about your presentation." "I didn't use a single one of my prepared notes," Naomi laughed. "Once I started talking, it just flowed." "Because you spoke your truth," Lucas observed, "not what you thought they wanted to hear." They stopped at a bench overlooking the water. As they sat together, Lucas turned to her with unusual hesitation. "Naomi," he began, his voice quiet but determined. "These past months since you approached me in the rain, you've done more than help me rejoin the world. You've shown me that there can be meaning after loss. That connecting with others isn't a betrayal of Elena's memory, but an honoring of everything she valued." He reached for her hand, a deliberate echo of her earlier gesture. Naomi felt the significance of this role reversal, of Lucas initiating connection rather than merely accepting it. "Even broken people can become a safe place for each other," he said, quoting her words back to her. "You've been that safe place for me. I hope sometimes I've been that for you too." "You have," she assured him, "more than you know." In that moment, something healed in both of them. Not completely, but enough to transform pain from a barrier into a bridge. The evening after the healthcare conference, Naomi returned home to find her mother waiting up despite the late hour. Margaret sat in her favorite armchair, a photo album open on her lap, the one containing pictures of Thomas Clark. "I've been thinking about your father all day," Margaret explained, wondering what he would make of his little girl speaking to all those important doctors. "He probably wouldn't believe it," Naomi said with a soft laugh. Margaret turned a page, revealing a photo of Thomas holding infant Naomi. "He used to tell everyone that you had healing hands, even when you were tiny. Said you'd squeeze his finger when he was sad, like you knew he needed comfort." "I don't remember that," Naomi admitted. "You were too young," Margaret said. "But he was right. You've always had that gift, seeing people's pain and meeting it with gentleness. Even in school, you'd bring home the lonely children, the troubled ones." Naomi had never thought about this pattern in her life, how consistently she had gravitated toward those others overlooked. Today felt different, though. Instead of helping individuals, I was advocating for systemic change. Margaret closed the album. "That's growth, baby. From helping one person at a time to helping change the systems that hurt them in the first place." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "Your friend Lucas was there?" Margaret finally asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Yes," Naomi confirmed. "He sat in the back." "But you knew he was there," Margaret observed. "That made a difference, didn't it?" "It did, knowing someone was watching who understood, who sees me completely. It gave me courage." "That's rare," her mother said softly. "Being truly seen." "Lucas sees me," Naomi admitted. "Not just the strong, capable nurse everyone else sees. He sees my doubts, my fears, my fatigue. And he stays anyway." Margaret studied her daughter's face. "You've always tried to save everyone else." Maybe it was time someone saw that you need saving too. The gentle observation struck a chord so deep that Naomi felt tears gathering. She had spent so many years being the strong one that acknowledging her own need for support felt almost forbidden. "It's okay to need people, Naomi," Margaret continued, reaching for her daughter's hand. "It doesn't make you any less strong, it just makes you human." 2 days after the healthcare conference, Lucas stood before Elena's grave for the first time since her funeral. The cemetery was peaceful in the late morning light, oak trees casting dappled shadows. He had brought white lilies, her favorite, and a sense of purpose that had been absent during his last grief-blinded visit. For 18 months, he had preserved Elena in amber, unchanging, frozen at the moment of loss. But standing now before the simple granite marker, Lucas felt something different. Not the drowning undertow of grief, but a gentler current of remembrance. "I think you would like Naomi," he said aloud, placing the flowers carefully. "She has your way of seeing beyond surfaces, your stubborn commitment to truth." Speaking to Elena felt both strange and natural, like resuming a conversation long paused. Lucas had never been particularly spiritual, yet expressing these thoughts aloud carried its own healing. "I abandoned everything we built together," he continued. "Not just the foundation or the company, but our way of seeing the world. I think I was punishing myself, as if by refusing happiness, I could somehow balance the cosmic books." Breeze stirred the cemetery trees, sending spring blossoms drifting across the grass. "I'm not moving on from you," he said finally, voicing the fear that had kept him from this place. "I'm moving forward with you, carrying what you taught me into whatever comes next." As he stood to leave, Lucas noticed an elderly woman placing flowers at a nearby grave. She moved with the cautious deliberation of someone managing chronic pain. Yet there was something resolute in her careful progress. Impulsively, he approached her. "May I help you with those?" he offered. The woman studied him with surprise that quickly softened to gratitude. "Thank you, young man. These old knees don't bend like they used to." As Lucas knelt to arrange her flowers, she rested a hand briefly on his shoulder. "It gets easier," she said quietly. "Not smaller, but lighter somehow. Less like drowning and more like carrying a stone in your pocket. Always there, but not always the only thing you feel." "My Herbert's been gone 12 years now," she continued. "I still talk to him every Tuesday. Tell him about our grandchildren, the neighborhood gossip, my garden troubles." Her words offered Lucas a vision of grief integrated rather than overcome. Not a mountain to conquer, but a landscape to inhabit differently over time. As Lucas left the cemetery, he felt Elena's presence not as a haunting absence, but as an integrated part of his continuing journey, a voice in his moral compass, a contributor to his evolving self. 1 week later, Lucas and Naomi met with community leaders at a vacant storefront near Freeman Square Park. The space, formerly a hardware store, featured high ceilings, large windows, and a central location accessible to diverse neighborhoods. Lucas had purchased the building through his foundation for a new community resource center. The main floor could house the healthcare services, Lucas explained. Examination rooms along the back wall, reception and waiting area here, maybe a pharmacy corner. Naomi walked the perimeter, calculating spatial needs based on her clinic experience. "We could fit 3 exam rooms comfortably, maybe 4 if we're efficient." Dr. Josephs nodded approvingly. "Having a permanent location would dramatically expand our services. We could offer regular hours, maintain patient records on site, maybe even add dental care." The community leaders present contributed their own visions. A retired teacher suggested an after-school homework center. The pastor recommended community meals. A neighborhood advocate emphasized the need for computer access and job search assistance. The second floor could accommodate those educational and social services, Lucas noted, leading the group upstairs. Naomi noticed Lucas's transformation, from the silent, grief-bound figure she had first encountered. He listened attentively to each suggestion, asked thoughtful questions, and demonstrated genuine interest in community perspectives. "What will you call it?" asked Mrs. Washington, the elderly sweetgrass basket weaver. Lucas glanced at Naomi before answering. The Elena Vasquez Community Center. My late wife believed that journalism's highest purpose was making the invisible visible. This center will continue that mission in a different form. The simple statement held no melodrama, just quiet purpose and appropriate honor. As the meeting concluded and the representatives departed, Lucas and Naomi remained behind, standing amid the empty space with its echoing potential. I'd like you to be involved in the healthcare planning, Lucas said. Not just as a consultant, but as the director once it's operational, if that interests you. The offer caught Naomi by surprise. Me? I'm just a nurse, Lucas. I don't have management experience. You have exactly what's needed, he interrupted gently. Practical knowledge of community healthcare needs, genuine connection with the people we want to serve, and most importantly, the ability to see beyond symptoms to underlying causes. Naomi gazed out at the neighborhood she had served for years from a cramped mobile unit. The possibility of creating something permanent felt simultaneously exhilarating and overwhelming. It would mean leaving the mobile clinic, she said, becoming more administrative. Initially, perhaps, Lucas acknowledged, but you'd be shaping something sustainable, building systems that embody your values instead of just working within flawed ones. I'd want to continue some direct patient care, she said, already considering possibilities. Lucas smiled, the genuine expression that had become increasingly common. We'll build it around your strengths, he promised. This isn't about fitting you into a predetermined role. It's about creating something that continues what you've already begun. Late that evening, after the excitement of the community center planning session had settled, doubt crept in as Naomi prepared for bed. The magnitude of what she was considering, leaving her familiar nursing role for a leadership position, suddenly felt overwhelming. What if she failed the community that was counting on her? Unable to sleep, she called Lucas, something she had never done before. It was nearly midnight, but he answered immediately. Naomi, is everything all right? I'm sorry to call so late, she began. I've been thinking about the center, about the director position. You're having doubts, he concluded. What if I can't do this? The question burst from her. I'm just a nurse, Lucas. I've never managed anything larger than a shift rotation. I've never allocated resources or written policy. What if I fail and let everyone down? Lucas was silent for a moment, considering her concerns rather, then rushing to dismiss them. Do you remember what you said when I mentioned returning to Nextland? He finally asked. That you should go where you could do the most good, she recalled. Exactly. The same applies here. Your experience as just a nurse has shown you precisely what works and what doesn't in community healthcare. You've witnessed the gaps firsthand. But what if... You'll make mistakes, he interrupted gently. We all do. The question isn't whether you'll get everything right, but whether you'll learn and adjust when you don't. Naomi sat on the edge of her bed, his words gradually easing the tightness in her chest. I'm scared, she admitted, of being visible in that way, of having my decisions scrutinized. I understand that fear, Lucas said, but remember what you've been teaching me since the day you offered me coffee in the rain. That connection requires vulnerability. That meaning comes from risking failure, not avoiding it. The parallel struck her, how they had each helped the other toward a truth they themselves struggled to embrace. We figure it out together, he promised. One day at a time. The simple phrase echoed her own words to him from weeks earlier. As the conversation ended, Naomi felt the panic receding, replaced by cautious determination. 3 months after the community center planning began, Freeman Square Park hosted a different kind of gathering. Early autumn had painted the trees in gold and russet, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of fallen leaves across the familiar paths. Lucas sat on his usual bench, though with notably different posture, relaxed, present, engaged with his surroundings rather than lost in grief's isolation. As he watched children playing near the pond, a smile touched his face. Not the polite social mask he had once perfected for business functions, but a genuine expression of quiet contentment. This park, once his purgatory, had transformed into something else entirely, a beginning rather than an ending, a community rather than a solitary confinement. Naomi approached from the eastern path, accompanied by her mother Margaret and several others, Dr. Josephs from the mobile clinic, Mrs. Washington with her sweetgrass baskets, the homeless veteran who had become the unofficial guardian of the park's west entrance, and Vincent the cat trotting faithfully behind them like an orange shadow. "Quite the entourage you've assembled," Lucas observed as they reached his bench. "Not an entourage," Naomi corrected gently. "A community. Our community." They settled around the bench that had witnessed so much. Margaret on a portable chair Lucas had thoughtfully provided, the others finding spots on the grass or nearby benches. Someone produced a thermos of coffee. Another shared homemade bread. Without formal planning, a picnic materialized, simple but profound in its meaning. "Hard to believe it's been 3 months since the community meeting," Dr. Josephs remarked, accepting a coffee cup from Mrs. Washington. "And only a few weeks until the center opens." "Fastest permit approvals I've ever seen," Lucas noted, with the hint of a smile. "Amazing what happens when a viral video puts city officials under public scrutiny." They all laughed, a sound that would have been unimaginable to Lucas 6 months earlier, when laughter felt like a betrayal of grief. Now he recognized it as what Elena would have wanted. Life continuing, community forming, purpose rediscovered amid loss. As their informal gathering continued, Lucas watched Naomi moving among the group, connecting people with quiet introductions and thoughtful questions. She had blossomed in these months of planning the center, her natural compassion finding larger expression through organizational leadership. The nurse who had once believed herself just a caregiver was emerging as something more, a community builder, a systems designer, a visionary in her own quiet way. As their impromptu picnic continued, Lucas caught Naomi's eye and nodded slightly, a silent signal they had developed during months of collaboration. She understood immediately, gathering everyone's attention with a gentle, "Before we continue, Lucas has something he'd like to share." Lucas stood unfolding a paper from his pocket, with hands that no longer trembled. 3 months ago, he would have found this moment unbearable. Being the center of attention, speaking to a group, making public commitments. Now, though still uncomfortable, he found the discomfort manageable for the sake of what mattered. "As most of you know," he began, "the Elena Vasquez Community Center is scheduled to open next month. The healthcare services, directed by Naomi, will begin operations immediately. What you don't know is that yesterday, the foundation received approval for the second phase of funding." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the small gathering. Lucas continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "This expansion will include a dedicated housing assistance program, a job training center, and extended hours for the medical services. Additionally, we're establishing a journalism fellowship focused on healthcare inequity reporting, continuing Helena's work in a new form." He paused, drawing a breath before the most important part. "I've asked Naomi Clark to serve as the center's executive director, overseeing all operations while maintaining her role in healthcare services." All eyes turned to Naomi, who appeared momentarily stunned despite their previous discussions. This public announcement made official what they had been planning privately, a significant step beyond her initial agreement to run only the medical component. "With one condition," Lucas added, his gaze meeting Naomi's, "that she accept proper compensation and hire sufficient staff to ensure she doesn't work herself into exhaustion. Some people need reminding that caring for others begins with caring for oneself." Margaret applauded first, her arthritic hands clapping with determined enthusiasm. The others joined, their faces reflecting genuine joy for the woman who had touched all their lives in different ways. As the applause subsided, Naomi stood beside Lucas, emotions playing across her expressive face. Surprise, gratitude, momentary, fear, and finally resolve. "I accept," she said simply, with gratitude and humility. The weeks that followed witnessed remarkable transformations, both in the physical spaces being renovated for the community center and in the people involved in its creation. The former hardware store gradually shed its commercial past, emerging as something entirely new, a place designed for healing, connection, and community empowerment. Lucas, once the reclusive figure on a park bench, now moved through the construction site with focused energy, consulting with contractors, adjusting plans based on community feedback, ensuring that every detail reflected both practical need and deeper purpose. His technological background found unexpected application in designing efficient systems for patient record management and resource allocation. The analytical mind that had revolutionized healthcare algorithms now turned toward the human infrastructure to have community care. Naomi, meanwhile, navigated her evolving role with growing confidence. The nurse who had once doubted her capacity for leadership now conducted staff interviews, developed operational protocols, and created partnerships with local organizations, all while maintaining the compassionate presence that had defined her nursing career. She had not abandoned direct patient care, but had expanded her definition of healing to include the systems that enabled it. Their partnership flourished in this shared purpose, each bringing complementary strengths to the project. Where Lucas contributed strategic vision and resource management, Naomi provided human insight and community connection. They had developed a wordless shorthand in meetings, often communicating volumes through a glance or a slight nod. Witnesses sometimes commented that they functioned like a single mind working through two different perspectives. Freeman Square Park remained their touchstone, a place to reconnect with their beginning amid the whirlwind of creation. Though their morning meetings became less regular as opening day approached, they still found moments to sit on their bench, sometimes in conversation, sometimes in companionable silence. Vincent the cat, now sleeker and more confident, often joined them, having appointed himself unofficial supervisor of both the park and the emerging center nearby. The bench itself, once a symbol of isolation and grief, had transformed in meaning, becoming instead a reminder that healing begins with being seen, that connections form in unexpected moments, and that sometimes the most profound journeys start with a simple cup of coffee offered in the rain. On the evening before the Elena Vasquez Community Center's official opening, Lucas and Naomi returned to their bench in the gentle glow of sunset. The park was unusually empty, as if nature itself had granted them this moment of quiet reflection before tomorrow's public celebration. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the light change across the pond's surface, golden then amber, then deepening rose. Vincent appeared as if summoned, settling between them with his customary air of having arranged the entire universe precisely for this moment. Lucas stroked the cat's head absently, his other hand resting on a leather-bound journal, Elena's last, which he had given to Naomi months earlier and which she had returned to him today, filled with her notes and observations about expanding its vision. "What do you think made you notice me that first day?" Lucas asked suddenly, breaking their contemplative silence. "Out of all the people you passed in this park every morning, why stop for me?" Naomi considered the question, her gaze following a pair of ducks making their evening circuit of the pond. "You reminded me of my father," she said finally. "Not in appearance or circumstance, but in that moment of vulnerability when no one is seeing you, when you're drowning in plain sight." Lucas nodded, understanding completely. "And now, here we are building something neither of us imagined then." "Life is strange that way," Naomi agreed. "The most important journeys often begin with the smallest steps." They watched as the sunset painted the clouds in magnificent streaks of crimson and gold, the kind of ephemeral beauty that demands witness. "I've been thinking about something Elena used to say," Lucas said after a while, "that we're all connected by invisible threads, and that acknowledging those connections, seeing each other completely, is the most revolutionary act possible in a world determined to keep us isolated." Naomi smiled, recognizing the echo of her own mother's wisdom about kindness as resistance. "She sounds like she and my mother would have had a lot to talk about." "They would have," Lucas agreed. They both understood that systems can't change until the people within them change, until we learn to see each other's humanity, instead of just our functions or our problems. As darkness gradually enveloped the park, lights illuminated the pathways, And in the near distance, the newly finished community center glowed with warmth, windows bright with promise, the sign bearing Elena's name clearly visible even from their bench. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Naomi asked, watching as Lucas's gaze lingered on his late wife's name. "Yes," he said with quiet certainty. "For the first time in a very long time, I'm ready for tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that." The simple statement carried profound weight, not a declaration of grief conquered or pain forgotten, but of life continuing with purpose despite irreplaceable loss. Lucas had not moved on from Elena, but had moved forward with her memory integrated into his continuing journey. "We save each other, don't we?" Naomi observed softly. "Not in grand, dramatic rescues, but in small moments of being truly seen." Lucas nodded, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness, a connection forged through shared purpose and mutual recognition. That's what the center is really about, beneath all the programs and services, creating a place where people can see and be seen completely. As they sat together with Vincent purring between them, the park settled into evening peace around them. In the distance, the sound of construction equipment at the center finally fell silent. Preparations, complete for tomorrow's opening. Everything was ready for a new chapter to begin, not just for the center, but for the two people whose unexpected friendship had made it possible. Above them, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of twilight, while below, their bench, once a solitary outpost of grief, had transformed into something else entirely. A beginning point, a touchstone, a reminder that even in our most isolated moments, we remain connected by invisible threads of shared humanity. For Lucas and Naomi, that connection had become a foundation strong enough to build upon, not just a community center, but a way forward for them both. "We must find time to stop and thank the people who make a difference in our lives," Lucas quoted softly, Kennedy's words finding new meaning in this moment of transition. Naomi squeezed his hand gently in acknowledgement. No further words were needed between them as they watched night embrace the park, one day ending as another waited to begin. Thank you for joining us for this journey from isolation to connection. If Lucas and Naomi's story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to be seen today. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate how small acts of kindness can transform lives in extraordinary ways. Remember, even broken people can become safe places for each other. Sometimes all it takes is a cup of coffee and the courage to notice. Until next time, from our bench to yours.